Hello, hello, hello. ¿Cómo están? This is Gringo CTO reporting live, except not live for you, from Mexico City. And today I wanted to talk about a topic that is very likely to alienate a lot of the people I used to work with in Silicon Valley. But this is why I personally don't like or use Node.js. So I have my little outline here. Let's get into it. And the very first thing I want to clarify is that I'm not against JavaScript per se. I think as far as languages go, it does have its foot guns like anything, but it is more or less okay, especially since ES6 and Beyond and all of those improvements that they did to the language. It is perfectly fine to work in. The tooling is fantastic. My issue is not there. My issue is in Node.js specifically as a runtime for JS in the backend. And so I'm a big believer in using JS or really any tool for the things that it is good at. And in the case of JavaScript, that is stuff in the browser. If you need to add interactivity to a web page, really, even in the case, as I say here, like you're not using JS directly, you're still probably going to end up using JS. HTMX, which is super hot right now, Livewire, which is huge in the Laravel ecosystem. You may not directly be writing JS, that's the entire point, but you are in fact using JS under the hood. It is the lingua franca of the browser. That's where it was designed, that was where it was born, that's where it is good, and there is no problem with using it there. So my issues are more or less completely restricted to usage on the back end with nodes specifically. So with that out of the way, I think the first thing that a lot of people don't appreciate about Node.js is how weak the standard library is. There are a lot of things that you get for free in a language like Golang, for example, and I like Go, where you may not even need a library, a package for a lot of stuff, simply because the language has it built in, and it comes with the rigor and everything that comes with a very mature engineering organization shepherding the project, like Google in the case of Go. And because of that, you just don't need to pull in a dependency. And as you're going to see, dependencies are basically the root of pretty much all of my problems with Node. So the fact that you don't have a standard library that's very strong, in turn means that you have to pull in a package for just about everything. And that is, among other reasons, just such a drain on your time. When you want to start a project, the whole point is to get a proof of concept out the door, learn from your users as quickly as possible. And when you have to pick and choose every single little package and understand what is hot this week, what got abandoned by the maintainer last week, on and on and on, it is just exhausting. Some people love that stuff and love being in the mix and staying on top of everything, whatever. I prefer to just learn my tools really well, understand their strengths and their weaknesses, and move on with actually solving the business problems that actually matter. So, more specifically, what I'm talking about is the fragmentation in the ecosystem. I do think that in Node.js land, people get shiny object syndrome a lot, meaning that this week there's something hot, next week something else is hot. I'll go through some examples, but I do think that things move so quickly in that ecosystem. There's so much churn, in other words, that it is really hard for the community as a whole to standardize on even a small set of solutions for a long length of time. And that's destructive if your goal is to just find something that works and use it for a repeated number of projects and maintain those projects over a long period of time. One of the things that is super obvious, I think, is a missing feature is just the lack of an auth package. Like if you want to pull in user authentication in your project, what do you use? I mean, I know that auth.js and nextauth, basically the same thing, are a thing in JS world, and they work well enough in Next.js. But there is really no good option anyway, to the same level that you would find with Laravel, with Django, with Rails. Even in the case that the auth package is not built into the framework, other ecosystems have something that you can just use. And so the answer to that problem is something like, oh yeah, don't worry about it. Just pull in Clerk or some other vendor, outsource your entire authentication to a third party, which is just so astonishingly stupid from a business standpoint. Like your data is your most precious thing, and your user data is among the most precious pieces of data that you have. And you're talking about putting that in the hands of a third party that you can't necessarily trust. And anytime people tell me that I'm being too paranoid about that issue, I just point out that large tech companies have effectively canceled people for all sorts of reasons. I'm not going to touch on politics ever on this channel. I'm just saying there are all sorts of reasons, whether it's business, whether it's politics, some sort of something that people don't like about you. And bottom line, you just don't want to have your future in somebody else's hands. And so the idea that this ecosystem doesn't have a way to authenticate users, at least not a canonical way that people use and gets audited for security all the time, etc., is just so emblematic of the problems here, in my opinion. Same thing if you go to ORMs. I have a separate video on why you probably shouldn't use ORMs, at least in cases that matter. That being said, you look at all the options that are around today, people still haven't standardized on one. Prisma was hot for a while. Keasley, which I think Keasley is a really cool project, and it's something I would consider using. But that was hot for a minute. It's still around, but people then moved on to Drizzle, which again, I love the approach. Generating a query builder that has type safety and all that. My issue is not with how they're doing things. My issue is things do not have enough time to bake to actually become the standard of the community. And by the time Prisma gets to a certain level of maturity, Drizzle becomes the next hot new thing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, well, it is hard to build on a strong foundation that way. I'll put it that way. So I think this all ties into a lack of full stack frameworks. Again, people are going to hate on me for saying this. Like Next.js is a full stack framework, and you can pull in Passport.js into Nest, and you can do all of these things. Believe me, I played with all of these solutions. I've even used them on serious projects in the past. It's not the same level of maturity that you're going to find in other ecosystems, and that's just a straight up fact. If you go to Rails, Django, Laravel, probably some others, you're going to find a lot of stuff that's just baked in or has a very strong sort of consensus package in the ecosystem, and the problems that you will actually hit 90% of the time, if not more, as a web developer were solved 10 years ago, and you can just pull in a high quality dependency and stop worrying about it. You don't have to go to 100 YouTube videos and try to figure out what is exactly the right thing at this moment in time for me to use. And also just the quality of the packages and the people maintaining those packages tends to be higher in other ecosystems. In the Laravel ecosystem, Shpati, I think is how it's pronounced, and Caleb Porzio are two people who do phenomenal work. Phenomenal. I can actually show you their GitHub pages, but Shpati alone, let's see here. Look at the sheer number of packages that they have published, and it's not uncommon to see stuff getting 5,000 stars and up. A lot of things that maybe it was just a little bit below the importance to include with the framework. Shpati needs it for their own projects, and they are kind enough to donate that back to the community and maintain it, more importantly. Same thing with Caleb Porzio. The guy is extremely brilliant and has shipped projects like Livewire himself, which, people talk about doing full stack JS and all of that. I mean, you can now do full stack PHP. I guess whether you like that or not depends on how much you enjoy using PHP, but regardless, there are some really amazing projects that come out of the community. And importantly, the community likes to standardize around those things, and it becomes much easier to get projects off the ground and maintain them as a result. So that is all, I admit, a little bit subjective, but if you want to see something more objective, I just pulled the CVEs, the security issues for Laravel year to date in 2023, and you can see there's only two. So the cost of having so much fragmentation in the ecosystem, you end up pulling in dependency for just about everything that you need. Whereas in the case of Laravel, as one example, two security issues, the team deals with them quickly, and actually these particular cases, if we want to get into it, Laravel is currently version 10, version 11 I think will come out in the next probably 4 months. So this issue here, which is probably the more serious one, was already on a version that was two versions out of date at the time it was reported, I believe. And this one also on an older version as well. And it's a very small number. I could pull up the numbers, but you can go look for yourself. There's a crazy number of issues that come up. Everybody knows about the cases of somebody wanting to get attention and pulling packages from the NPM ecosystem, what have you. So look, I am grateful to everybody who pushes a package and brings it out into the world and all of that, but the fact that it is so easy and so easy to abandon those packages later and so hard to figure out the difference between the two types of packages, the good ones and the bad ones, it's just a risk. And so the idea that I can build a project on a solid foundation, have a couple of issues reported so far this year, and just my security, as long as I'm keeping my packages up to date and my server up to date, are pretty much just a non-issue. I mean, that's great, right? And it also gets to the last part, which is the maintainability. Since I seem to be talking about Laravel a lot, I mean, I do know that sort of that upgrade from, what was it, version 6 to 7 or 5 to 6, something like that was difficult. But yeah, since then, I mean, it's been a breeze to upgrade versions. In contrast, you could also just say maybe I don't know what I'm doing, but I kind of doubt it. I've had to deal with projects in Node that were several years old. And there comes a point, I've talked to this with a bunch of Node guys. There comes a point, and it usually seems to be around 4 years, where you pretty much just have to buy into doing a rewrite. And that's it. Why? Because so many of the dependencies that you had to pull in early in the project have been abandoned and are no longer compatible with the other new dependencies that you need to pull in. At some point, it is simply less work to rewrite your entire product in whatever is the newest flavor of the month, candidly, than it is to try and get all of that stuff up to date. And that's just the sad truth. The only time I've ever seen that not be the case is when the scope of the project is small enough that you aren't needing to use dependencies. So, in other words, it's almost entirely your own code. Usually, that's only going to happen in the case of microservices. If you're doing something that's full stack, by nature, you are going to end up pulling in dependencies. And when it's this mix and match grab bag of small little packages, stuff is just going to rot. That's the way it is. So, all of that being said, these issues are more or less specific to Node. And like I said, there's nothing about the language of JS or TypeScript that dooms it to this fate. If it had a better runtime, a lot of this could be solved. I don't claim to be an expert on Deno or Bun or anything like that, the sort of next generation Node.js. Deno is from the founder of Node.js. By the way, if you want to go look up a funny quote, look up at what Ryan Dahl, the founder of Node, has to say about Node and why he started Deno. Spoiler is that he is not a fan of his own creation, being Node, and created Deno specifically to address some of the security issues that I mentioned up here. So Deno has some interesting ideas around doing security. Bun is supposed to be an extremely fast successor to Node with some new ideas as well. I believe both come with much larger standard libraries while maintaining at least some degree of Node compatibility. Anyway, this is not a video about Deno or Bun, and I don't claim to be an expert, like I said. I do know that these tools still aren't quite at the maturity, in fact, not even close to something like Laravel, Django, Rails. Take your pick. That being said, someday, if this picture changes in, let's say, a world where Deno takes over, I am going to use the best tool for the job, because that is the job. And I'll just close by saying that there are cases, like I'm not a zealot. There are cases where I would be willing to use Node. And so in cases where, essentially any situation where the runtime strengths are going to shine, and that's usually cases where you need a lot of concurrency, and also where the drawbacks that I was mentioning before don't matter as much. So that would be a case like a microservice where, let's say almost all of the code I need, maybe all of it, because the scope is so small, I can do all of that myself. And because I'm not pulling in dependencies, that code is going to live for a long time and be fine. And actually, to be fair, JS does have a really good history of backwards compatibility. So as long as I'm not having to rely on the ecosystem so much for what I'm doing, I might actually consider it, especially in the case where I didn't have or didn't want to have a separate non-JS backend. I mean, usually these days, in a case where I can't do something in my full stack framework of choice, so I'd probably reach out to Go and do a smaller service for that. But if for some reason I didn't want to do that, I could see myself potentially using Node. So anyway, I know that was a lot. If you have questions, hit me up in the comments, and I'm happy to respond. Any thoughts, anything like that. I always appreciate a like and subscribe. By the way, this is a very new channel, and every little bit helps. So if you want to see more content like this, help me out, spread the love, and I will see you guys la próxima vez.